What if I told you there was once an ancient Hmong kingdom that stood high in the mountains of China, a proud people with their own land language and leaders completely erased from history? Between the 1700s and 1800s, wave after wave of massacres swept through the Hmong villages of southern China. Thousands were hunted, millions disappeared, and today no one talks about it. But why? Who were the Hmong? Why did the Chinese Empire fear them so much they tried to wipe them off the map? In the highlands of southern China, hidden between misty peaks and rugged hills, once lived an ancient people known today as the Hmong. Long before national borders and modern nations, the Hmong thrived in these mountains, practicing their own customs, farming their lands, and living in harmony with the forests. They were not a wandering tribe. They were not primitive. The Hmong were a civilization with elders, leaders, warriors, and stories passed down for thousands of years. But to the powerful Chinese Empire, they were a threat in the 1700s. Under the rule of the Qing Dynasty, that fear turned into hatred. The Chinese government launched massive military campaigns to erase the Hmong from history. What followed was a genocide, hidden from the textbooks. Whole villages were burned to the ground. Men were killed. Women and children scattered into the jungles or captured as slaves. The Chinese called it pacification. The Hmong call it survival. This is the untold story of the Hmong Empire in ancient China and the centuries of bloodshed that followed. Hey guys, tonight we journey deep into the mists of southern China to a time when empires clashed not in grand open fields, but on treacherous mountain slopes. We're looking for a ghost and echo, a kingdom that may or may not have ever existed. The Hmong Empire. You stand on a rain-slicked limestone path somewhere in the highlands of Guizhou province. The air is thin and so cold it bites at your exposed skin. Thick, white fog swirls around you, swallowing the world just 10 feet in every direction. You're not in a museum or a library. You are there in the early 1700s, and you're learning firsthand that survival in these mountains is not guaranteed. In fact, I'd say your odds are not great at all. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps the channel more than you know. And while you're at it, I'd love to see where you're all listening from tonight. Post your location and your local time in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey. Together, the story begins with the whisper, a myth, a powerful legend that lives in the bone and marrow of the people who call these mountains home. Long before they were known as the people of the high places, they believe they were the masters of the lowlands, a powerful kingdom on the fertile plains of the Yellow River, ruled by a great king, a warrior king named Qiyu. He is a figure of immense importance, a mainstream historical fact in the sense that he is recorded in ancient Chinese texts as a formidable adversary of the legendary Yellow Emperor, a rebel with bronze weapons and a horned helmet who challenged the very foundations of what would become China. This legendary war ended in defeat, and so began a great migration, a centuries-long story of displacement pushing these people ever southward from the heart of Chinese civilization into the rugged, untamed frontiers, where you now find yourself. Your feet slip on the mossy stones of the trail, and you realize this is no place for an empire. The local gym subscription here is just gravity, and the membership fee is paid in sore calf muscles and the constant fear of a misstep sending you tumbling into the fog below. This is a refuge, a fortress of last resort, not a seat of power. The wind carries fragments of stories from one village to the next, stories of a time when the Hmong people had their own written language, their own laws, their own king recognized by all the clans. It's a powerful vision, and one that fuels a spirit of fierce independence. But historians still argue whether this fabled Hmong kingdom was a literal historical state with centralized authority and defined borders, or if it represents a powerful cultural memory, a collective golden age, mythologized and embellished over centuries of being pushed from their ancestral lands away to maintain identity in the face of constant pressure to assimilate. Was there truly a king and a palace, or is the kingdom a metaphor for a lost way of life, a time of unity before the great scattering? The truth, as it often does, probably lies somewhere in the murky space between fact and folklore, a space as thick and obscuring as the mists that now soak through your clothes, making you shiver. You hear a strange tidbit, a quirky folktale passed down through generations, a story to explain a profound lost among. They say once had a written language, a script as complex and beautiful as any other. It was recorded on durable materials, like ox hides, and specially prepared hemp cloth. But during a time of great flight and famine, pursued by their enemies, and with nothing else to eat, the ancestors were forced to boil and consume the very books that held their history and laws. They literally ate their own written words. Talk about an all-consuming passion for literature. From that day forward, the knowledge had to be preserved in a different way, encoded into the intricate geometric patterns of their embroidery, the pine taub or flower cloth. Each dress, each baby carrier, each funeral robe became a library, a textile testament to a history that could no longer be read, but could be worn and remembered visually, a silent and beautiful act of defiance, carried on the backs of women. The fog is a constant companion up here. It's nature's privacy setting, and it's permanently set to friends only. It blankets the small villages that cling to the mountainsides like stubborn lichen. It muffles the sound of your footsteps, just as it muffles the sound of an approaching imperial patrol. It conceals the secret paths that link one community to another, a hidden network invisible to outsiders. This landscape of vertical forests and jagged karst peaks is everything to the people here. It is their provider, their protector, and their prison. All at once they are people defined by the geography they inhabit, masters of a vertical world of thin soil and thick clouds. But down below, in the fertile river valleys, the world is changing fast. The new Qing Dynasty, fresh from its conquest of China, is turning its gaze inward, looking to consolidate its power and tame the wild frontiers. The emperors in Beijing see these mountains not as a mystical realm of ancient spirits, but as a disorderly, untaxed, and potentially rebellious territory that must be brought under the absolute control of the Dragon Throne. And the people who live here, the Hmong, or Miao, as the Han Chinese call them, are seen as little more than stubborn barbarians who refuse to bend the knee. Two worlds are on a collision course: the decentralized world of the mountain clans and the hyper-organized bureaucratic machine of the Qing Empire. You are standing at the exact point where these two worlds are about to meet, and the friction will soon spark a fire that will burn across these mountains for more than a century. The whisper of a lost kingdom gives the people here a reason to fight, but the might of a rising empire gives them an enemy they cannot possibly defeat. The people you find yourself among don't call themselves Miao, which is a broad and often derogatory term used by the Han Chinese, meaning something akin to barbarian or weed, a label slapped on dozens of distinct groups who dare to live outside the neat Confucian. Or do they call themselves Hmong, meaning free people? Or they identify simply by their clan name, Li Vang Xiong, a web of kinship that forms the true bedrock of their society. This isn't a nation in the way the emperor in Beijing would understand it. It's a constellation of fiercely independent households and villages scattered across the peaks, a society built on the unbreakable bonds of family, not the cold edicts of a bureaucracy. You watch a woman expertly navigate a steep hillside, her back laden with firewood, her movements economical and sure-footed, a lifetime of practice written in her muscles. A mainstream historical fact of their existence is their mastery of swidden agriculture, also known as slash and burn, a system perfectly adapted to these poor mountain soils. They clear a patch of forest, burn the felled trees to release nutrients into the earth, and then plant their crops of upland rice, corn, and opium poppies for a few years until the soil is exhausted. Then they move on, leaving the plot to lie fallow and regenerate for a decade or more. It's a patient, cyclical way of life, dictated by the rhythm of the mountain itself, not by a tax collector's schedule. This deep connection to the land is spiritual as well as practical. The Hmong are primarily animists, believing that the entire world is alive with spirits called dabs. There are dabs in the trees, the rivers, the rocks, and the wind. Some are benevolent ancestral spirits who watch over the household from a spirit world, while others are wild and capricious spirits of the untamed wilderness who can cause mischief or illness if not properly appeased. This worldview shapes everything. It explains why a certain grove of trees is never cut, why a strangely shaped rock is given offerings, and why illness is not just a biological event but a spiritual one, a sign that a person's soul has been lost or captured and must be called back its a universe where the veil between the physical and spiritual world is thin and permeable, and navigating it requires a specialist, a shaman or tsivnib, who can travel in a trance to the spirit realm to negotiate with the dabs and restore balance. He's part doctor, part therapist, and part interdimensional IT support for when your spiritual router goes down, and his authority in the village is often far greater than that of any government official from the lowlands. Their society is profoundly decentralized, a concept that Qing administrators, with their love of rigid hierarchies, find both baffling and infuriating. The highest level of political organization is the clan, led by respected elders, whose authority comes from wisdom and consensus, not from divine mandate or military might. Loyalty is given first to the head of your household, then to your clan elders, then to your village. There is no king of the Hmong sitting on a throne somewhere to whom everyone owes allegiance, just a network of families bound by blood and shared custom, a system that makes holiday family gatherings look like a casual meeting of strangers. This lack of a central leader makes them incredibly difficult to control from the outside. You can't just defeat one army or co-opt one king to make the entire population submit. You would have to conquer every single village on every single mountain. A daunting and bloody prospect. Historians still debate whether this radical decentralization was an ancient and inherent feature of Hmong culture or a defensive adaptation honed over centuries of resisting state encroachment and fleeing from larger, more organized powers. Was it a political philosophy or a survival strategy born of necessity? The answer, like the truth of their lost kingdom, is probably a complex mix of both. A deep-seated love of freedom reinforced by a long history of being pursued. You see this independence in every aspect of their lives, from the way they build their houses of wood and bamboo nestled into the hillside to the way they raise their children with a sense of communal responsibility. They are people accustomed to making their own rules and solving their own problems. A quirky tidbit of their mountain life is the creation of incredibly effective crossbows, using materials sourced entirely from the forest. The bowstave made from resilient bamboo, or with the string from twisted hemp fibers, and the bolts tipped with poison, a concoction derived from local plants whose recipe is a closely guarded secret. This isn't a weapon of conquest, it's a tool for hunting and for self-defense, perfectly suited to the close-quarters combat of the dense forest. A quiet and deadly answer to an intruder. It embodies their philosophy of self-reliance and their intimate knowledge of the natural world. A Ph.D. in applied botany from the University of Extreme Self-Defense, a callback to the memory of their lost books. They carry their knowledge not on paper, but in their skills, their hands, and their oral traditions. As you stand at the edge of a village looking out from the high perch, the fog from the morning begins to burn off, revealing the world below. The view is breathtaking, a sea of green-clad mountains rolling away to the horizon, but now you can also see something else far down in the valleys. You can make out the glint of sunlight on the tiled roofs of a Han Chinese town, a town that wasn't there a generation ago. You see the orderly grid of rice paddies, a testament to a different way of farming, a different way of ordering the world. You can almost feel the presence of the Qing state, a vast and patient leviathan slowly extending its tentacles up from the lowlands. Its administrators, its soldiers, its tax collectors, and its settlers. It sees these mountains not as a vibrant, self-sufficient world, but as an empty space on a map of frontier to be tamed, civilized, and made productive in the service of the empire. The Hmong people's fierce independence, their decentralized society, their very identity as free people, is a direct challenge to this imperial vision, a challenge the Dragon Throne cannot and will not tolerate. The people of the mist are about to meet the people of the bureaucracy, and the mist themselves won't be enough to protect them from the storm that is gathering below. From the quiet stillness of the mountain air, you are now plunged into the meticulous, overwhelming heart of the machine itself. Beijing, the Forbidden City, a sprawling universe of vermilion walls and golden-tiled roofs laid out on a perfect north-south axis, a city designed to mirror the harmony of the heavens. Here, there is no mist, no crooked path, no wild, untamed nature, only order, precision, and an almost terrifying level of human control. You are a disembodied observer in the court of the Hmong Emperor, a man who ascended the throne in 1722, and who might just be the most obsessive workaholic micromanager in Chinese history. He is not a flamboyant warrior king like his father Kangxi, nor a poet-scholar like his son Qianlong. He is a stone-cold administrator, a man obsessed with efficiency, tax revenue, and absolute control. He sleeps only 4 hours a night and spends his days personally reviewing thousands of government documents. His vermilion-inked comments are feared and respected. Sight for officials across the vast empire. The Dragon Throne's grand design isn't just about conquering new lands. It's about perfecting the administration of the lands it already has, turning the entire realm into a well-oiled bureaucratic machine that runs solely on his command. From his perspective, the southwestern frontiers, where the Hmong live, are a glaring bug in the imperial operating system, a messy, chaotic anomaly that offends his sense of order. These regions are governed by a system inherited from previous dynasties called the Tusi system, where local non-Han chieftains are granted hereditary titles and allowed to rule their own people according to their own customs, as long as they pay a nominal tribute and don't cause too much trouble. To Yongjing, this is an unacceptable compromise, a splinter of feudalism lodged in the flesh of his centralized state. These Tusi lords are too independent, too powerful. Their loyalty is questionable, and most importantly, they stand between the emperor and the people, preventing direct taxation and the implementation of imperial law. He sees the Southwest as a region full of untapped resources, mineral wealth, and land for settlement, but it's locked behind this archaic system. So he champions a radical new policy. Its name is Gaidiguelu, and it translates to replace the native chieftain system and integrate into the stream of administration. It's a clean, bureaucratic phrase for a brutal and revolutionary process, a mainstream historical fact that defines his reign. It means systematically eliminating the hereditary Tusi lords by force if necessary, and replacing them with centrally appointed Han Chinese magistrates who are loyal only to Beijing and who will serve for a limited term before being rotated elsewhere, making sure they never get too cozy with the locals. The emperor sits at his desk late into the night, the flicker of lanterns casting long shadows on the silk-clad walls. He's not just reading official reports from his grand secretaries, he's reading something much more interesting. A quirky and highly effective tidbit of his rule is his perfection of the palace memorial system, a secret channel of communication that allowed trusted officials from across the empire to write directly to him, bypassing the entire chain of command. These memorials were delivered in locked boxes, to which only the emperor and the writer had the key. It was the 18th century equivalent of encrypted messaging, and it gave Yongjing a direct, unfiltered view into the state of his empire. He could hear about corruption, troop movements, or local unrest without it being sanitized by layers of bureaucracy. It's through these secret messages that he learns of the savagery of the Miao, their strange customs, their refusal to adopt Han farming practices, and most alarmingly, their resistance to imperial officials. He sees a problem that needs a solution, and Gaidiguelu is that solution, a one-size-fits-all policy to bring order to chaos. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for this policy was truly a Confucian civilizing mission, a genuine belief that they were bringing the benefits of an advanced culture to a backward people, or if that was just a public relations spin on a more cynical land and resource grab. Was it about security, wanting to create a solid, defensible southern border free from rebellious tribes, or was it about economics, wanting to integrate the region's population and resources into the national tax base? The truth is likely a combination of all three, a perfect storm of ideological fervor, strategic necessity, and economic greed, a classic imperial cocktail that the Hmong are about to be forced to drink. The emperor's perspective is clear. These people need to be taught how to be proper subjects. They need to learn the Chinese language, wear proper clothes, abandon their slash-and-burn farming for settled agriculture, and, most importantly, they need to pay their taxes like everyone else. It's not just a suggestion, it's an imperial mandate. The paperwork for this grand project is staggering, a mountain of directives, maps, and troop deployment orders that would make any modern office manager weep. It's the ultimate top-down reorganization project, managed by a CEO who never leaves his office, but whose reach is absolute. From the quiet halls of the Forbidden City, the order goes out. The grand design, conceived in the Emperor's tireless mind is translated into ink on paper passed from ministry to ministry, and then sent by courier on horseback, traveling for weeks to the far-flung southern provinces, where you first began your journey. The policy of Gaitaguelu is no longer an abstract idea. It is now a set of instructions in the hands of a provincial governor, an ambitious magistrate, and military general. The machine is beginning to move its gears, grinding slowly at first, but with unstoppable momentum. The emperor in Beijing has drawn a new map, a map of a unified and standardized China, and the Hmong homelands are right in the middle of a space he intends to redraw, and the people who live there, the people of the mist, are about to find out that the emperor's ink is often mixed with blood. The emperor's grand design now arrives in the form of a stern-faced official on a tired horse, riding into the administrative town at the foot of the mountains. He carries with him an imperial edict that will shatter the delicate balance of power that has existed here for centuries. A system you now see collapsing in real time. The Tutsi system. For generations, the relationship between the Chinese state and the mountain peoples has been managed through these local chieftains. These Tutsi lords were often Hmong or from other non-Han groups, and their families had ruled these hills for as long as anyone could remember. It was a mainstream historical fact of frontier governance across multiple dynasties, a practical, if messy, compromise. The emperor in the distant capital would grant the Tutsi lord a fancy title and a seal of office, and in return the Tutsi would be responsible for keeping the peace, collecting a modest tribute mostly in local goods like timber or medicinal herbs, and raising a local militia if the empire ever needed it. For the Hmong on the ground, it meant they were ruled by one of their own, or at least by someone who understood their language, their customs, and the treacherous local geography. It was a buffer, a layer of insulation between their world and the all-consuming power of the Chinese state, a deal that worked more or not less for everyone involved, like having a landlord who lives in the same building and mostly leaves you alone as long as you keep the noise down and don't burn the place down. But now that system is crumbling before your very eyes. The Qing official unrolls a scroll and reads the decree. The local Tutsi lord is to be stripped of his hereditary title and his authority. His lands and the people on them are now under the direct jurisdiction of a newly appointed magistrate, a Han Chinese scholar official who has never set foot in these mountains before, who doesn't speak the language, and who sees the local customs not as a rich cultural tapestry, but as a checklist of barbaric practices to be eradicated. The transition is not smooth. You see the Tutsi lord and his family forced to hand over the seal of their office, their faces a mixture of confusion, humiliation, and fury. For generations, their power was absolute in these hills. Now, they are nobodies, replaced by an outsider who views them with contempt. The system is being deliberately dismantled stone by stone, and the buffer is gone. The Hmong are now face to face with the raw and mediated power of the Qing state, and they do not like what they see. This isn't just a change in management, it's a hostile takeover. The new magistrate gets to work immediately. With the zealous energy of a man on a mission, he sets up his office as Yamen and begins implementing the Gaitaguelu policy. With textbook precision, new land surveys are ordered not to understand the existing patterns of Swidden agriculture, but to register every plot for taxation. New laws are proclaimed based on the Qing legal code, which clashes violently with the clan-based customary law of the Hmong, where disputes are settled by elders, not by a magistrate who demands fees for every judgment. And most insultingly, a census is ordered forcing every household to register with the state, listing their names and the number of able-bodied men, a move the Hmong rightly see as a prelude to conscription and forced labor. Historians still debate the extent to which the Tutsi themselves were exploiters of their own people. Some Tutsi lords were undoubtedly tyrants who skimmed tribute and ruled with an iron fist, making the transition to direct Qing rule initially seem appealing to some of their subjects. But for most, the Tutsi, however flawed, were a known quantity, a part of their world, whereas the new Qing officials were a completely alien and far more systematic form of oppression. It was a choice between the devil you know and a devil with a bigger army, better accountants, and a deep-seated belief in his own cultural superiority. A tough call for anyone. As you watch the new administration take hold, you notice a quirky and revealing tidbit about Qing bureaucracy, their obsession with official seals. Every new magistrate arrives with a bronze or silver seal intricately carved with his title in both Manchu and Chinese script. This seal is the symbol of his authority. Everything he does, from issuing a verdict in a legal case to requisitioning supplies for his garrison, must be stamped with this seal to be considered valid to the Qing. It represents order, legitimacy, and the emperor's power extending to this remote corner of the realm. To the Hmong, however, it's just a strange metal block wielded by an arrogant foreigner, a symbol of an intrusive power they never asked for and do not recognize. They had their own agreements, their own ways of sealing a pact with a handshake, a shared drink, or the word of an elder, which held more weight than any piece of stamped paper. It's a perfect metaphor for the clash of two different worlds, a world of personal bonds versus a world of impersonal bureaucracy, a world of trust versus a world of paperwork. The crumbling of the Tutsi system creates a dangerous power vacuum. The old lords, who once kept the peace between rival clans or negotiated disputes over hunting grounds, are now powerless. Their authority has evaporated, and the new magistrate lacks the local knowledge or respect to fill the void. Old tensions simmer, and new grievances pile up with no one to mediate them. The Hmong feel the squeeze. From every direction their land is being measured, their sons are being counted, their customs are being mocked, and their spiritual beliefs are dismissed as superstition. A quiet resentment begins to build in the small mountain villages, a resentment that spreads from one clan to another, carried on the wind like a spark in a dry forest. The buffer is gone, the insulation has been stripped away. The delicate ecosystem of the frontier, which had allowed for a semblance of coexistence, is now broken beyond repair, and the people of the mist are beginning to realize that their choices are narrowing down to submit and disappear, or resist and fight. The emperor's grand design for a perfectly ordered empire is about to run into the messy, chaotic, and deeply human reality of a people who just want to be left alone, a people who call themselves free and are about to be pushed to prove it. The air in the mountains grows heavy, not with mist, but with tension. The new Qing administration is no longer a theoretical policy discussed in Beijing. It is a harsh reality on the ground, and the first cracks in the stone begin to appear in the late 1720s and early 1730s. You are there in a small Hmong village in what is now eastern Guizhou, or western Hunan, a cluster of wooden houses clinging to a steep incline. The new magistrate has sent his runners into the hills with a demand that cuts to the very heart of Hmong existence. A new tax, not a symbolic tribute of pheasant feathers or rare herbs, but a tax payable only in silver, a currency the Hmong barely use and rarely possess. A mainstream historical fact of this period is the Qing Dynasty's move to a silver-based economy. This monetization of the tax system was a cornerstone of their effort to centralize control. But for subsistence farmers in the mountains, who operate on a system of barter and trade, it is a crushing and impossible demand. Where are they supposed to get silver? They don't have mines, they don't have large-scale commercial crops to sell. Their wealth is in their pigs, their chickens, their rice stores, and their knowledge of the forest, none of which the tax collector will accept. You watch a group of Hmong elders gather around a smoky fire in the center of the village, their faces etched with worry and anger. They are discussing the summons from the magistrate to come down to the county seat to register their households and pay the new tax. They have heard stories from other villages of men who went down and were beaten or imprisoned for not having enough silver. They see the Qing not as a government providing services, but as a predatory force come to extract wealth they do not have. It's like asking someone who lives on a boat to pay their taxes in rare desert scorpions. It's not just difficult, it's nonsensical and insulting, a deliberate humiliation designed to break their spirit of independence. The pressure mounts daily. Qing officials, backed by small detachments of soldiers, begin to push deeper into the mountains, setting up small forts and administrative posts in valleys that were once exclusively Hmong territory. These outposts are a constant visual reminder of the occupation, a stone and timber declaration that the old ways are over. The conflict is not just about taxes, it's a clash of cultures that plays out in dozens of small daily frictions. The Qing officials demand that the Hmong change their style of dress, abandoning their distinctive embroidered hemp and indigo-dyed cotton for the plain, somber clothes of Han peasants. They try to enforce Han marriage customs, outlawing the traditional Hmong practice of courtship, where young men and women mingle freely and choose their own partners through song duels of vibrant and beautiful tradition. Now labeled as licentious and immoral, historians still debate the degree of local agency in these early conflicts. Were the Qing officials on the frontier strictly following orders from Beijing, or were many of them ambitious or greedy individuals who exceeded their mandates, seeing the Gaidiguelu policy as a golden opportunity for personal enrichment and career advancement by showing how successful they were at civilizing the barbarians? It's likely that the relentless pressure from Emperor Yongzheng to produce results encouraged many a magistrate to be overly zealous, creating a far more explosive situation on the ground than the emperor himself might have intended. It's the age-old story of middle management going rogue to please the boss, with predictably disastrous results. A quirky tidbit from this time of rising tension is the Qing's complete misunderstanding of Hmong social structures. They kept trying to identify the chief of a village or a region to hold responsible for collecting taxes or enforcing laws. But as you've seen, such a figure often didn't exist. Qing records are filled with frustrated reports from magistrates complaining that the Miao are like scattered sand and have no recognizable leaders. They would often just grab the first reasonably well-dressed or articulate man they could find, declare him the headman, and then punish him when the rest of the village inevitably ignored his authority. This cultural blindness, this inability to see a society that didn't mirror their own rigid hierarchy, was a fatal flaw in their approach. They were trying to dismantle a machine without bothering to learn how it worked first, and every move they made just increased the friction and resentment. The first cracks appear not as a coordinated rebellion, but as isolated acts of defiance. A tax collector is ambushed on a mountain path, and his silver is taken back. A small wooden fort is burned in the middle of the night. A survey team is chased out of a valley with crossbows. These are small sparks, but they fall on very dry tinder. The Qing response is swift and brutal. A village suspected of harboring the attackers is torched, its livestock confiscated, and its men executed as a warning to others. But this collective punishment backfires spectacularly. Instead of cowing the Hmong into submission, it forges a new sense of shared identity in the face of a common enemy. Clans that were once rivals now begin to talk to each other, sharing information and pledging mutual support. The emperor in Beijing wanted to replace the Tutsi and integrate the Hmong into the stream of administration, but his policies are having the opposite effect. They are uniting the scattered sand into a sandstone of resistance. The pressure has been building steadily, and the stone that is Hmong society, which has weathered centuries of storms, is beginning to show signs that it is about to shatter, not by crumbling into dust, but by exploding outward in a violent wave. The first great uprising is coming, and you can feel the tremors of its approach in the cold mountain ground beneath your feet. The scattered sparks of defiance finally ignite into a raging inferno. In the year 1735, the pressure that has been building for over a decade explodes into the first great uprising, a massive coordinated rebellion that engulfs the mountainous borderlands of Guizhou and Hunan. This isn't just a few ambushed tax collectors anymore. It's a full-scale war. You are swept up in the whirlwind of history as tens of thousands of Hmong warriors rise up, united by a shared sense of desperation and a burning desire to reclaim their autonomy. The rebellion is triggered by a seemingly minor incident. A Qing officials attempt to arrest several Hmong leaders in the Taijiang region of Guizhou. But this is merely the final straw. The Hmong fighters, armed with their homemade crossbows, long knives, poison-tipped arrows, and a few antique matchlock muskets, move with a speed and ferocity that stuns the local Qing garrisons. They use their intimate knowledge of the terrain to their advantage, appearing and disappearing like ghosts in the mist, setting ambushes in narrow passes, and launching surprise attacks on the newly built forts. They overrun dozens of Qing outposts, capturing weapons and supplies, and for a brief glorious moment, it seems like they might just drive the invaders out of their mountains for good. The leadership of the uprising is a testament to the Hmong's ability to organize in the face of an existential threat. Clan leaders and shamans who once commanded the loyalty of only a few villages, now find themselves leading armies of thousands. They are not professional generals, but they are fighting for their homes, their families, and their entire way of life, a motivation that proves far more powerful than the meager salary of a Qing soldier stationed thousands of miles from his home. A mainstream historical fact is that the early stages of the 1735 rebellion were remarkably successful. The rebels captured and held several important county towns, demonstrating a level of coordination and military capability that shocked the Qing court. The Emperor Yongzheng, who had prided himself on his administrative control, is enraged by the news. He sees it as a personal failure, a direct challenge to his authority and the very legitimacy of his Gaita-Guelu policy. The imperial response is therefore not just a matter of restoring order, it is a matter of saving face. The Hmong war cry echoes through the valleys, and their banners, a simple affair of indigo cloth, often decorated with clan symbols or shamanistic charms, become a terrifying sight for the isolated Qing garrisons. They fight with a desperate bravery born of having nothing left to lose. Their goal is simple and absolute: to exterminate the Qing officials and soldiers and drive the Han settlers from their lands, returning the mountains to the state they were in before the grand design of the emperor ever reached them, a return to the time of the Tutsi, or even before a time of true freedom. But even in their initial victories, a sense of tragic foreboding hangs in the air. They know they are fighting not just the local garrisons, but the entire might of the Qing Empire, an empire with near limitless resources and manpower. Historians still debate the exact nature of the rebels' ultimate goals. Did they truly believe they could establish a new independent Hmong state, a revival of the fabled kingdom of their myths, or was this a more practical and desperate attempt to simply turn back the clock, to force the Qing to abandon the Gaita-Guelu policy and return to the old Tutsi system of indirect rule? Was it a war for independence or a violent negotiation tactic, a bloody petition to be left alone? The motivations likely varied from leader to leader and fighter to fighter, but the unifying thread was a rejection of the new Qing order amidst the chaos and violence of the uprising. A quirky tidbit emerges in the form of prophetic and millenarian beliefs that sweep through the rebel camp. Shamans and charismatic leaders arise, claiming to have visions from the spirits, promising that a Hmong king will soon descend from the heavens to lead them to victory. They preach that warriors who follow them will be immune to Qing bullets and cannonballs, a powerful message of hope that galvanizes the fighters and makes them fearless in battle. It's a classic feature of peasant rebellions around the world, a blending of spiritual fervor and political resistance. When earthly power seems insurmountable, people turn to supernatural power for salvation, a callback to the importance of the spirit world in Hmong culture, where the line between the physical and the metaphysical is always blurred. This belief in invulnerability is a double-edged sword, fueling incredible bravery, but also leading to catastrophic tactical errors against the disciplined firepower of the Qing armies. It's a form of spiritual confidence that unfortunately doesn't function as actual body armor. The initial shock of the uprising in Beijing quickly turns to a cold, calculated resolve. The Yongzheng emperor, now old and ailing but no less ruthless, pours imperial resources into crushing the rebellion. He dispatches his most trusted and experienced generals, seasoned veterans from the campaigns in Central Asia, and gives them a simple order: pacify the region at any cost. The small local garrisons that were so easily overrun are about to be replaced by a massive expeditionary force, a professional army with logistic supply lines and a singular purpose: to grind the rebellion into the dirt. The brief dream of a Hmong victory is about to collide with the brutal reality of the Qing military machine. The war has just begun, and its most brutal chapter is yet to be written. The mountain paths that once served as secret highways for the rebels will soon become killing grounds, and the mists that concealed their movements will soon be thick with the smoke of cannon fire and burning villages. The great uprising of 1735 has awakened the dragon, and its fiery response is coming. The Qing response to the 1735 uprising is not a police action, it is a full-scale invasion of their own territory. The emperor sends in the big Guns literally, you watch in awe and terror as the imperial war machine rumbles into the southern highlands, a force utterly alien to this landscape of quiet villages and misty peaks. This is the army of the Qing Bannermen, the elite multi-ethnic military force that conquered China itself, descendants of the Manchu horsemen, who swept down from the north, supplemented by disciplined Han Chinese Green Standard Army soldiers. It is a professional, organized, and brutally efficient force. A mainstream historical fact is the Qing military's effective use of combined arms tactics. They don't just send an infantry, they deploy cavalry where the terrain allows, and most terrifyingly of all, they bring artillery. They have heavy cannons that can batter down the walls of a fortified town, and lighter, more mobile cannons nicknamed squatting tigers that can be hauled up mountain paths to blast away rebel stockades from a safe distance. For the Hmong fighters, armed with crossbows and spears, the sound of cannon fire is the sound of doom itself, a thunderous roar that shakes the very mountains and represents a technological gap they simply cannot bridge. You trudge along a muddy track behind a column of Green Standard soldiers, each one in a uniform tunic, carrying a matchlock musket and a long saber. Their movements are slow but relentless. They aren't trying to outmaneuver the Hmong in the forests. That would be foolish. Instead, they are applying a strategy of slow strangulation, a boa constrictor's approach to counterinsurgency. They build roads as they go, cutting down forests and leveling hills to create supply lines for their massive army. They construct a network of new forts and fortified watchtowers, stone and earth redoubts strategically placed to control key valleys and passes, cutting off the rebels' lines of communication and slowly carving up their territory into manageable kill zones. Each fort is a node in a vast web of imperial control, a permanent anchor of state power driven deep into the heart of the Hmong homeland. It's a slow, methodical, and soul-crushingly effective strategy that values logistics and engineering over battlefield heroics, the 18th century equivalent of a massive infrastructure project designed with the sole purpose of total military domination. The contrast between the two sides is stark. The Hmong rely on guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run raids, ambushes, and the advantage of fighting on home turf. They are highly mobile and elusive, able to live off the land and melt back into the civilian population, a nightmare for any occupying army. But they lack a central command structure, a reliable supply of advanced weapons, and the ability to fight a sustained conventional war. The Qing, on the other hand, are a ponderous beast, slow to anger, but unstoppable once in motion. They have a clear chain of command, a bureaucratic state dedicated to supplying their armies, and a willingness to absorb immense casualties to achieve their objectives. Historians still debate the effectiveness of Hmong weaponry versus Qing firearms. While Qing muskets were slow to load and inaccurate at a distance, they could deliver devastating volleys that shredded Hmong formations in open combat. The Hmong crossbow was silent, deadly, and had a much faster rate of fire, making it a superior weapon for ambushes in dense forest. But it lacked the range and psychological shock value of gunpowder weapons. It was a classic asymmetric conflict where the ultimate winner would be determined not by the skill of the individual warrior, but by the ability to organize and project power over a vast and difficult landscape. A quirky and grim tidbit of this military campaign is the Qing practice of offering bounties for severed heads or for captured rebels, particularly leaders. This turned the war into a gruesome marketplace, where success was measured in body parts. It encouraged extreme brutality and led to the killing of many non-combatants, as soldiers were not always picky about whose head they were taking to claim their silver reward. It was a policy that dehumanized the enemy and transformed the conflict from a struggle for political control into a bloody war of extermination. You can imagine the cynical soldiers joking about it, their grim humor a way to cope with the horrors they were both witnessing and perpetrating. It's a grim reminder that the bureaucratic state you saw in Beijing, with its refined calligraphy and obsession with order, can also be a machine for generating unimaginable violence, a callback to the emperor's clean hands which signed the orders, but never have to touch the blood. The final battles of the 1735 uprising are not glorious affairs. They are systematic slaughters, Hmong strongholds, painstakingly built on steep Cliffs are besieged and bombarded into submission. The magical belief in invulnerability to bullets evaporates in the face of disciplined musket volleys. The rebellion is broken not in a single decisive battle, but through a long and brutal campaign of attrition. The Qing generals methodically hunt down the rebel leaders and their remaining followers. The dream of a free Hmong homeland dies in a haze of cannon smoke, and the cries of the defeated. The mountains fall silent once more, but it is not the silence of peace, it is the silence of exhaustion and despair, the silence of a graveyard. The Qing banners now fly from dozens of new fortresses. Their cannons stand guard over the valleys, and the emperor's grand design has been reimposed with gunpowder and steel. The uprising is over, but the war on the Hmong people is about to enter a new and perhaps even more insidious phase. The fires of the 1735 rebellion have been extinguished, but the embers of resentment glow brightly beneath a blanket of ash. You are now in the aftermath, a period of forced and sullen peace, where the Hmong experience life under direct military occupation. The Qing strategy was not just to defeat the rebels, but to ensure they could never rise again. The mountains are now dotted with the garrisons and fortresses you saw being built, a permanent and menacing presence in the landscape. These are not temporary camps. They are small, self-sustaining towns of soldiers there. High stone walls and watchtowers, a constant reminder of who is in charge. A mainstream historical fact is that this policy of building garrisons, called tuanjing, was a long-standing Chinese method of frontier control. It involved settling soldiers and their families in strategic locations, giving them land to farm, and turning them into a permanent military agricultural colony. These soldier farmers would in theory pacify the region's secure supply lines and gradually civilize the surrounding native population. Through their example, it was a strategy of colonization disguised as a security measure. You walk through a valley that was once a Hmong heartland. Now it is dominated by a square-walled Qing fort. The rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoes from within its walls, not forging farm tools, but repairing muskets and sharpening swords. Han Chinese soldiers drill in the dusty parade ground, their shouted commands in a language alien to these hills. Their presence changes everything. The local economy is warped to serve the needs of the garrison. Hmong villagers are often forced to sell their meager food surpluses to the soldiers at fixed low prices, or worse, have it requisitioned as a form of tax. The soldiers, for their part, are often bored, lonely, and fearful men stationed far from home in a hostile environment. This often leads to friction with the local population. Arguments, theft, and violence are common. The garrisons that were meant to bring order often become sources of disorder themselves, a petri dish for the very resentment they were designed to suppress. Life for the Hmong becomes a daily navigation of a new and oppressive reality. They must now carry travel permits to move between villages, a measure designed to prevent them from gathering and plotting. They are subject to curfews, and their traditional festivals and large gatherings are banned under the pretext that they are a threat to public order. The new magistrates, backed by the military, enforce the cultural assimilation policies with renewed vigor. They set up schools to teach the Confucian classics, but only in the Chinese language schools that Hmong children are often forced to attend. Their goal is to create a new generation of Hmong who are culturally Han, who have forgotten their own language, their own stories, and their own identity. It is a slow, grinding war on their very soul. Historians still debate the long-term effectiveness of this garrison-based pacification. On one hand, it did prevent another large-scale uprising for several decades by making the logistical and human cost of rebellion prohibitively high. On the other hand, it created a permanent state of low-level conflict and deep-seated hatred that would explode with even greater violence later on. Did it truly pacify the region, or did it just put a lid on a boiling pot, creating a pressure cooker environment that would inevitably lead to a more catastrophic failure in the future? It's the classic dilemma of counterinsurgency, winning the war, but losing the peace. A strategy of control that breeds a desire for vengeance. A quirky and poignant tidbit of life under occupation is the Hmong's use of music and song as a form of coded resistance. Since their gatherings are banned, the traditional courtship rituals of singing love songs between groups of young men and women become a clandestine activity. Songs that once spoke of love and nature now carry hidden meanings, laments for their lost freedom, insults directed at the Qing soldiers, and messages of solidarity passed from one valley to the next in melodic code. The Qing soldiers hear only strange music they don't understand, but the Hmong hear a declaration of their continued existence, a beautiful and subtle act of defiance that flies under the radar of the military authorities. It's a reminder of the power of culture to survive even in the most oppressive circumstances, like a wildflower growing in the crack of a fortress wall, a callback to the importance of their oral traditions, now weaponized against their occupiers. The mountains feel different now. The freedom of the hills is gone, replaced by a network of invisible walls and ever-watchful eyes. The old paths are still there, but walking them feels dangerous. The dabs, the spirits of the land, seem to have retreated deeper into the forests, scared off by the alien noise and iron of the occupiers. The shamans' trance seems less potent against the harsh reality of a soldier's musket. The Hmong are forced to turn inward to their households and their clans. Preserving their culture in secret behind closed doors, they learn to live a double life, one face for the Qing officials, showing deference and obedience, and another for themselves, keeping the flame of their identity alive in the darkness. But this forced peace, this life under the shadow of the garrisons, is not sustainable. It is a peace built on fear, not acceptance. The generation growing up in the wake of the 1735 defeat is inheriting a legacy of humiliation and a burning desire for revenge. The Qing have occupied the land, but they have not conquered the hearts of the people, and in the quiet of the mountain nights whispers begin to circulate. Once more, whispers of a time when the mountains belonged to the Hmong, whispers that will one day coalesce again into a war cry beneath the surface of the Qing enforced peace. A secret world of resistance and survival continues to thrive. You move silently through this world, a world of whispers on the mountain wind, a testament to the resilience of a people who refuse to be erased. The garrisons may control the main valleys and roads, but the mountains are vast and full of secrets. The Hmong knowledge of the terrain now becomes their most valuable weapon. A mainstream historical fact of their resistance is the maintenance of a network of hidden trails known only to them. These paths traverse treacherous ridges, cross deep gorges on flimsy bamboo bridges, and pass through dense forests, where Qing patrol would become hopelessly lost. This network allows for secret communication between villages, the movement of people fleeing persecution, and the quiet coordination of resistance activities. It is a geography of defiance, a map of freedom superimposed on the official Qing map of control. To the soldiers in their forts, the mountains are a terrifying and hostile wilderness. To the Hmong, they are a complex and familiar sanctuary, a home that still protects them. Survival depends on secrecy and deception. The Hmong become masters of hiding in plain sight. They learn to cultivate their crops in small hidden plots deep in the forest, away from the prying eyes of tax collectors. They hide their surplus grain in secret caches in caves or buried underground, safe from requisition. They present a face of stoic compliance to the authorities while privately nurturing their traditions and their hatred of the occupation. It's a draining and psychologically taxing way to live, but it is the only way to survive. The community survival is paramount, and anyone who collaborates with the Qing is ostracized or worse, facing a justice far swifter and more personal than any magistrate's court. The clan structure, which the Qing saw as a weakness, now becomes a source of immense strength. A built-in cellular network for organizing secret activities with a high degree of trust and security. A stranger in a village is instantly recognized, and a warning can spread through the clan network in hours without a single written word. The most beautiful and ingenious form of secret communication is woven into the very fabric of their culture, a callback to the story of them eating their books, the pine tob or flower cloth embroidery that has always been a key part of Hmong cultural expression now takes on a new layer of meaning. Historians and cultural experts still debate the extent to which pine tob was used as a literal secret language, with specific geometric symbols corresponding to words or ideas. Some argue it was more of a general expression of cultural identity, a way of preserving Hmong cosmology and history in a visual form that the Han Chinese could not understand regardless of its specific function. It becomes a powerful tool of cultural preservation and defiance in a time when their language and customs are under direct attack. The women who sit for countless hours stitching these intricate patterns are not just making beautiful textiles. They are acting as scribes, historians, and librarians for a culture under siege. They are weaving the soul of their people into every thread, ensuring that their stories will not be forgotten. A quirky and fascinating tidbit of this clandestine world is the development of what could be called gossip warfare. The Hmong are masterful storytellers, and they use this skill to their advantage. They spread rumors and disinformation among the Qing garrisons designed to create fear and paranoia. Stories of fearsome mountain demons or tigers that specifically target Han soldiers are circulated to keep patrols out of certain areas. They spread tales of imminent attacks on one fort to draw troops away from another real target. It is a primitive form of psychological operations using folklore and the Qing's own superstitions. Against them it costs nothing. It's impossible to trace, and it is remarkably effective at keeping the occupying forces off balance and confined to their fortified spaces. It's another example of asymmetric warfare, where the weaker party uses its cultural knowledge as a weapon against a technologically superior but culturally ignorant foe. A ghost story can be as effective as a sharpened spear. The whispers on the wind carry more than just stories and warnings. They carry a promise, a prophecy, a dream. The memory of the 1735 uprising is not a story of defeat. It is mythologized into a heroic struggle, a temporary setback. The leaders who were killed are transformed into martyrs, their names invoked in songs and secret ceremonies. The shamans continue to speak of a future day of reckoning, when the Hmong king will return and justice will be done. This messianic hope is the fuel that keeps the spirit of resistance alive through the long, dark years of occupation. It gives meaning to their suffering and purpose. To their survival, the Qing may have won the battle, but the Hmong are playing a long game, a game measured in generations, not years. They are waiting, they are watching, and they are remembering every act of oppression, every confiscated bushel of rice, every banned festival is an injustice that is recorded not in books, but in the collective memory of the people. A debt that they fully intend to see repaid. The whispers are growing stronger, gathering force like the wind before a storm. Another explosion is inevitable. It is only a matter of when. The Qing victory in 1735 was not just a military one, it was the beginning of a new and more insidious campaign, a war on culture itself. The emperor and his officials believed that the rebelliousness of the Hmong stems from their savage and backward customs, so the only way to achieve a permanent peace is to fundamentally change who they are, to scrub away their identity and replace it with the proper civilized Han. One you witness this cultural assault firsthand, and it is as brutal in its own way as any. Cannonade. The policies are systematic and far-reaching. A mainstream historical fact is the implementation of the 6 edicts of the Hmong Emperor, which were later expanded into the sacred edicts of the Hmong Emperor. These were Confucian moral maxims designed to be preached and taught throughout the empire, promoting things like filial piety, respect for the law, and diligence in agriculture. But in the Hmong territories, they become a tool of forced assimilation. Officials are tasked with lecturing the Hmong on the virtues of the Han way of life, while simultaneously denigrating their own traditions as primitive and immoral. The attack on their way of life is relentless. Hmong clothing is one of the first targets. The vibrant colors, the intricate silver jewelry, the complex patterns of the pine top are seen by Qing officials as symbols of defiance and barbarism. They issue decrees banning traditional dress, forcing the Hmong to adopt the plain trousers and jackets of Han peasants. A move designed to make them visually indistinguishable from the dominant culture. To the Hmong, their clothing is a core part of their identity, a visible link to their ancestors and their history, a callback to how their stories are woven into the fabric itself. To be forced to abandon it is a profound act of humiliation, a stripping away of the self. Their language is also targeted. The new schools you saw being established teach only Mandarin Chinese, and Hmong children are punished for speaking their native tongue. The goal is to break the chain of linguistic transmission, to ensure that within a few generations the language of the free people will be nothing more than a faint memory. Their spiritual world is also invaded. The Qing officials with their rigid Confucian and Buddhist worldview see Hmong animism and shamanism as dangerous superstition. The work of the Civ Neeb the shaman, who travels to the spirit world, is outlawed as fraudulent witchcraft. The sacred groves, where offerings are made to the spirits of the land, are cut down to make way for productive farmland. The intricate rituals surrounding births, marriages, and funerals are condemned, and people are pressured to adopt Han ceremonies. Instead, this is a devastating blow, because, as you've seen, the Hmong worldview is built on a delicate balance between the physical and spiritual realms. To attack their beliefs is to unravel the very fabric of their reality. It's not just an insult, it's an act of cosmic vandalism that threatens to leave them spiritually adrift and unprotected from the malevolent dabs and angry ghosts. Historians still debate the true intentions behind this cultural warfare. Was it a genuinely held, if misguided, belief in the superiority of Han civilization, a benevolent attempt to uplift the barbarians for their own good, or was it a more cynical and pragmatic strategy to destroy the social cohesion of the Hmong, to break their spirit of resistance and make them easier to govern, and exploit the official documents speak the language of Confucian benevolence, but the actions on the ground are those of a conqueror determined to erase a competing culture from existence? It's the classic civilizing mission argument, a justification for cultural imperialism used by empires throughout history. A quirky and particularly telling tidbit of this cultural war is the Qing obsession with hairstyles. They demand that Hmong men adopt the Manchu queue, the shaved forehead and long single braid at the back that was forced upon all Han Chinese men as a symbol of submission to Qing rule. For the Hmong, whose traditional hairstyles vary by group and often hold deep cultural significance, this is another deeply personal and humiliating imposition. It's not just a haircut, it's a mark of subjugation, a daily reminder of their defeat. Qing officials would set up roadblocks and forcibly shave the heads of any Hmong men who resisted, creating scenes of struggle and degradation. It's a small thing, a matter of hair, but it perfectly encapsulates the Qing state's demand for total uniformity and the Hmong's fierce attachment to their own identity, a battle fought not with swords, but with razors and shears. This war on culture is in many ways more damaging than the military campaign. The garrisons control their bodies, but these policies seek to conquer their minds and souls. It creates a deep and lasting trauma, a sense of cultural loss and alienation that will echo for generations. But it also backfires. The more the Qing try to force the Hmong to become Han, the more stubbornly they cling to their identity in secret. Every banned song that is still sung, every forbidden pattern that is still stitched, every story of the ancestors that is whispered to a child by the fireside becomes a small but powerful victory in the ongoing war of cultural survival. The Qing think they are putting out the fire of Hmong identity, but they are merely forcing it underground where it gathers heat and intensity, feeding on the fuel of resentment and humiliation. The pressure is building again, and the next explosion will be fueled not just by a desire for political autonomy, but by a desperate need to save the very soul of their people from annihilation. The long sullen peace enforced by garrisons and cultural suppression finally shatters in 1795. Decades of simmering resentment have reached their boiling point, and the mountains of southern China erupt once more in a massive rebellion. This is not a mere repeat of the 1735 uprising. This one is bigger, more widespread, and born of a deeper desperation. You find yourself caught in the middle of the Qianlong Rebellion, also known as the Miao Rebellion of 1795 to 1806, a conflict that will rage for over a decade and draw in hundreds of thousands of people. The Hmong Emperor's son, the Qianlong Emperor, has been on the throne for 60 years, a period of immense prosperity and territorial expansion for the Qing Empire. But on the frontiers, his father's policies have created a legacy of suffering that is about to come due. The generation that grew up under occupation, the children who were forced into Confucian schools and saw their parents humiliated, are now adults, and they have had enough. The immediate trigger is a familiar story: local corruption. Qing officials demanding exorbitant taxes and abusing their power. But the root cause is the 60 years of systematic oppression that has preceded it. This rebellion is different from the last. One, it is characterized by a powerful wave of millenarian and religious fervor. A mainstream historical fact of this uprising is the central role of charismatic leaders like Shi Deng and Shi Sanbao, who claim to be messengers from the heavens or even reincarnations of past heroes. They preach a message of apocalyptic salvation, a promise that a Hmong king is coming to overthrow the Qing and establish a new kingdom of eternal peace, a callback to the prophecies you heard whispered after the last war. This religious element galvanizes the population in a way that purely political grievances could not. It transforms the rebellion from a fight for autonomy into a holy war, a cosmic struggle between good and evil. Warriors flock to their banners, believing they are divinely protected and that their victory is preordained. The movement spreads like wildfire across Guizhou and neighboring provinces, drawing in not just Hmong, but other oppressed non-Han groups and even disgruntled Han Chinese settlers, creating a vast multi-ethnic coalition of the discontented. The rebels' initial success is stunning. They are better organized and more ruthless than their predecessors. Having learned the lessons of 1735, they target not just Qing garrisons but the entire apparatus of state control, burning government offices, destroying official records, and executing magistrates and tax collectors. They also target the Han Chinese settlers who have moved onto their lands in the intervening decades, viewing them as collaborators and beneficiaries of the occupation. The fighting is brutal on both sides, with massacres and atrocities becoming commonplace. The Qing are initially caught off guard. The mighty empire under the aging Hmong Emperor has grown complacent. Its military machine is not the well-oiled force it was 60 years ago. Banner troops have become accustomed to a comfortable garrison life, and the Green Standard Army is plagued by corruption and poor leadership. The early Qing responses are piecemeal and ineffective, and the rebellion swells in size and confidence. A quirky and revealing tidbit from this period is the rebels' use of yellow banners and turbans. Yellow was the imperial color reserved for the emperor himself. By adopting it, the rebels were making a bold and unambiguous statement. They were not just protesting local injustices, they were challenging the legitimacy of the Qing Dynasty itself. It was a direct claim to the mandate of heaven, the traditional Chinese concept that legitimized a ruler's power. To the Qing court, this was the ultimate act of treason, a crime that could only be answered with overwhelming force. It was a sartorial middle finger to the most powerful man on the planet. Historians still debate the degree to which this rebellion was a purely Hmong-led affair or a broader regional uprising in which the Hmong were the most prominent and numerous participants. While Hmong leaders and grievances were central, the involvement of other groups suggests a widespread breakdown of Qing authority. In the southwest, was it a Hmong nationalistic war or a class-based peasant revolt that transcended ethnic lines? The answer is likely that it was both, a complex movement where ethnic identity and economic desperation were fused together in a single explosive compound. The Hmong Emperor, now in the final years of his long reign, cannot let this challenge stand. He had overseen one of the most glorious eras in Chinese history, and he would not allow it to end in chaos and rebellion. His powerful Grand Counselor Hushan, a man infamous for his corruption, but also a skilled administrator, began to mobilize the full resources of the state. Once more, huge armies are dispatched to the south, led by the most capable Manchu generals available. The Qing are prepared for a long and bloody war of attrition. They understand that this is not a minor border skirmish, but an existential threat to their control over a vast and strategic region. The brief period of rebel ascendancy is about to end, as the full weight of the empire slowly grinds into motion. The holy war of the Hmong is about to meet the cold, hard logic of imperial logistics and superior firepower. The mountains that had echoed with the rebels' shouts of victory will soon be filled with the sounds of a final desperate struggle for survival. The imperial war machine you saw being mobilized at the end of the Hmong Emperor's reign arrives with the force of a tidal wave crashing against a sandcastle. The rebels' faith in their divine protection shatters against the cold, hard reality of disciplined Qing armies, led by ruthless and experienced commanders like Helen and Fukheng in the yellow banners that once seemed so bold. A claim to the mandate of heaven now become targets for cannon fire. The war descends into a new level of brutality. The Qing generals implement a strategy of utter annihilation, a scorched earth policy known as Qingjiao, which translates to clearing out the bandits or eradicating the poison. It's a chillingly bureaucratic term for a campaign of extermination. A mainstream historical fact of late imperial Chinese counterinsurgency. This isn't about defeating armies in the field, it's about eliminating the population that supports them. The Qing strategy is to create a desert and call it peace. You walk through a land of ash and sorrow. The air is thick with the smell of burnt timber and something else, something acrid and deeply unsettling. Villages that once echoed with the sounds of life and the songs of courtship are now silent, blackened ruins. The only sound is the whisper of the wind through the charred skeletons of houses. The Qing armies do not distinguish between combatant and non-combatant. Any village suspected of supporting the rebels is put to the torch, its grain stores confiscated or burned, its livestock slaughtered, and its people cut down without mercy. The goal of Qingjiao is to deny the rebels any possible shelter, food, or source of new recruits. It is a horrific and brutally effective strategy. The guerrilla fighter who relies on the support of the people is like a fish in water. The Qing solution is to drain the sea. The mass executions are systematic and cruel. Captured rebel leaders are subjected to the death by 1,000 cuts, a slow and agonizing public execution designed to inspire maximum terror in the survivors. Thousands of rank-and-file fighters and suspected sympathizers are beheaded, their heads displayed on pikes at the entrances to retaken towns. As a grisly warning, it is a landscape of horror, a place where hope has died. You see families torn apart, children wandering lost through the ruins of their homes. The social fabric of the Hmong people is not just torn, it is shredded beyond recognition. The shaman's call to the spirits goes unanswered, drowned out by the cries of the dying. The Hmong dream of a new kingdom has become a waking nightmare. Historians still argue about the true scale of the depopulation caused by the suppression of the 1795 rebellion. Official Qing records report victories and the number of bandits killed, but they are notoriously unreliable pieces of imperial propaganda. Local gazetteers and oral traditions suggest a demographic catastrophe, with some regions losing more than half their Hmong population to the violence, famine, and disease that followed in the war's wake. The precise numbers are lost to history, but the scars on the land and the collective memory of the people tell a story of immense and almost unimaginable loss. Amidst the devastation, the Qing engage in a quirky and deeply arrogant form of propaganda. After pacifying a region, they erect large stone tablets known as victory steels. These monuments, carved with elegant calligraphy in both Manchu and Chinese, describe the glorious victory of the imperial forces, the foolishness and wickedness of the rebels, and the boundless benevolence of the Hmong Emperor in restoring order. It is the ultimate act of imperial gaslighting, a permanent stone record telling the survivors that the destruction of their homes and families was for their own good, a necessary surgery to cure them of their rebellious sickness. You can just imagine the remaining villagers being forced to attend the dedication ceremony, listening to a magistrate read out the inscription, a monument to their own defeat and humiliation. It's the world's worst, I told you so card written in granite. For those who survive the initial slaughter, a new ordeal begins: forced relocation. The Qing are determined to break the Hmong's connection to their mountain refuge. Is a callback to how these mountains have always been their fortress. They forcibly march tens of thousands of Hmong survivors out of their ancestral highlands and resettle them in the lowlands on plains controlled by Han landlords and supervised by Qing officials. Here, they are scattered, mixed with other populations, and forced to work as tenant farmers in conditions little better than serfdom. The mountains that defined them, that held the bones of their ancestors and the spirits of their world, are now forbidden to them. This policy of relocation is a form of cultural genocide designed to permanently destroy their communities, and their ability to resist the long march out of the mountains is a trail of tears, a silent procession of a broken people leaving behind everything they have ever known. The land of ash and sorrow is now a land of empty hills, a homeland haunted by ghosts and memories. The Great Qianlong Rebellion is over, and with its failure the last hope of a truly independent Hmong nation on Chinese soil seems to have been extinguished. Forever the silence that falls over the mountains is the silence of a tomb. The dust from the long war is settling, and the Qing are now masters of a silent and shattered landscape, but the conquest is not yet complete. The final stage is not military but intellectual, a campaign to classify, define, and ultimately neutralize the Hmong in the imperial imagination. You are no longer on a battlefield, you are in the quiet, dust-moted office of a Qing provincial official. He is not cleaning a musket, he is carefully grinding ink on a stone slab, preparing to paint. The war may be over, but the paperwork is just beginning, and this is the most insidious paperwork of all. Before you are spread the pages of a Miao album, a bizarre and fascinating artifact of empire. It is a beautifully illustrated manuscript, a handmade book, filled with delicate watercolor paintings of Hmong people. A mainstream historical fact is that Qing officials across the Southwest were commissioned to produce these ethnographic albums, known as Miao Man 2, or by Miao 2, which catalog the dozens of different non-Han groups under their jurisdiction. Each page features a painting of a man and a woman from a specific subgroup dressed in their traditional finery. Their poses are stiff and doll-like. They stare out with blank expressions captured and pinned to the page like butterflies in a collection. These albums are the Qing Empire's attempt to make sense of the bewildering diversity of the people they had just brutally conquered. They gave them labels based on their location or the most prominent color of their clothing: the red-headed Miao, the flowery Miao, the black Miao. A system of classification that was often arbitrary and ignored the complex clan allegiances that truly defined Hmong society. It was an attempt to impose a neat linear order on the messy reality of human culture, a project that was part census, part intelligence report, and part trophy case. It was the empire's Pokemon card collection of ethnic minorities, and the goal was to catch them all. Alongside each illustration is a short text describing the group's customs, their temperament, their style of farming, their marriage rituals, and their level of sinicization or cultural assimilation. The text is a toxic mix of genuine observation and condescending prejudice. A quirky tidbit is the often prurient and judgmental nature of these descriptions. An official might note with clinical detachment that a certain group's courtship songs are lewd, or that their women are promiscuous, or that the men are lazy and fond of drink. It's the 18th century equivalent of the comment section on the imperial internet, a place for anonymous officials to post their hottest takes on barbarian culture. Historians still debate the primary purpose of these Miao albums. Were they genuine works of early anthropology, a manifestation of the Qing court's intellectual curiosity about the varied peoples within their vast realm, or were they simply pragmatic tools of colonial governance, a know your enemy field guide for administrators and military commanders, designed to identify potential troublemakers and tailor methods of control for each group? Was the artist a scientist or a spy? The loving detail in some of the paintings suggests a real fascination with the aesthetics of Hmong culture, but the accompanying text, with its focus on judging their moral character and their potential for rebellion, suggests a much darker purpose. The truth is probably that they were both at once a reflection of an empire that was simultaneously fascinated by and deeply fearful of the people it ruled. An empire that could appreciate the beauty of a culture while actively working to destroy it. The irony is staggering, a callback to the war on culture. These albums preserve in exquisite detail the very clothing, hairstyles, and silver ornaments that the Qing were simultaneously trying to ban. They are a perfect snapshot of the vibrant material culture they sought to eradicate, creating a museum of a living culture they were in the process of killing. It's like taking a beautiful photograph of a building just before you detonate the explosives you've planted at its foundation. You can almost imagine an official meticulously painting the intricate patterns on a woman's sleeve one day, and then signing an order to confiscate and burn all such barbaric clothing the next. A level of cognitive dissonance that is truly breathtaking. For the Hmong themselves, this process of being drawn and described was a final humiliation. It reduced their complex living culture to a set of stereotypes, a caricature drawn by their conquerors. They were no longer a people, they were An entry in a catalog, a specimen to be studied and managed. These albums represent the intellectual cleanup after the military mess. They are the final nail in the coffin of Hmong independence, because they fix the Hmong in place both literally on the page and figuratively in the mind of the state. They are no longer a mysterious and unpredictable people of the mists. They are a known quantity, a problem that has been identified, studied, classified, and filed away. This act of defining them is an act of containing them. It sets the boundaries of their identity and their future within the Qing Empire. A future as a pacified and subordinate minority. The artists paint with delicate strokes, but their brush is dipped in the ink of power, creating a beautiful prison of paper and watercolor for an entire people. And for those who look at these albums in the quiet halls of power in Beijing, the message is clear. The Miao are no longer a threat. They are curiosity, a relic, a closed chapter in the grand story of imperial expansion. But for some Hmong survivors trapped in this new reality of being a living museum exhibit, there is only one option left: to escape the frame entirely, to walk off the page of the album and begin a new story somewhere else. The crushing defeat of the 1795 rebellion and the subsequent policies of cultural eradication and forced relocation create a new and desperate reality for the Hmong people of southern China. To stay is to face a future of servitude and cultural extinction, to lose everything that makes them who they are. It is in this crucible of despair that you witness the birth of a new survival strategy, one that will define Hmong history for the next 2 centuries. The Great Diaspora. A mainstream historical fact is that the turn of the 19th century sees the first significant waves of Hmong migration out of China southward into the sparsely populated highlands of what are now Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand. This is not a planned, organized resettlement. It is a slow and desperate trickle of families and small clans voting with their feet, choosing the uncertainty of a new land over the certainty of oppression in their old one. You join a small family group on their heartbreaking journey south. It is a journey undertaken in secret at night, moving through the familiar hidden trails you saw used for resistance. But now they are escape routes the family carries with them only what they can manage on their backs: a few bags of seed, corn, a cooking pot of flint and steel, and maybe a precious piece of silver jewelry, saved from the Qing tax collectors and looters. They are leaving behind everything else: their homes, the land that holds the graves of their ancestors, the entire world they have ever known. The decision to leave is an agonizing one, tearing families and clans apart. Some choose to stay hoping for better times, or simply too afraid to face the unknown dangers of the journey. Others see no other choice but to go. It is a quiet tragedy playing out in countless mountain villages, a slow unraveling of a society that has already been pushed to its breaking point. Their journey takes them across a formidable landscape. They must cross the Red River into Vietnam, navigating a region teeming with bandits, Qing patrols, and other dangers. They are moving into a world they do not know, a world with new languages, new political rulers, and new diseases. The highlands of Southeast Asia are not an empty paradise. They are already home to other ethnic groups, and the arrival of the Hmong often leads to new conflicts over land and resources. The Vietnamese emperors in Hue and the Siamese kings in Bangkok have their own views on frontier peoples and their own methods of control. A callback to the Qing's grand design. The Hmong are escaping one empire only to find themselves on the fringes of others. They are once again the newcomers, the outsiders, the people of the high mountains, a role they have been forced to play for centuries. Historians still debate the precise routes and timing of these early migrations, as they were largely undocumented movements of people trying to remain invisible. Oral histories, passed down through families, are the primary source of information, creating a rich but sometimes contradictory tapestry of stories about the first ancestors to cross the bitter sea of forests and mountains. Was it a continuous stream, or did it happen in distinct waves following specific leaders or clan networks? The archaeological and linguistic evidence suggests a gradual process spanning several decades, a slow bleed of people from the wounds inflicted by the Qing state. A quirky and poignant tidbit of this migration is the importance of seeds. The Hmong carry with them not just their culture and their memories, but the very seeds of their agricultural life: upland rice, corn, pumpkins, and most importantly the seeds of the opium poppy. For centuries the poppy had been a part of their mountain economy, a medicinal plant, and a source of cash to trade for salt and iron in the new lands of Southeast Asia. It would become their most important cash crop, a commodity that would give them a degree of economic independence, but also draw them into the complex and often violent world of global trade and colonial politics. These tiny seeds carried in a small cloth pouch represent a tangible link to their past and their only real hope for a self-sufficient future. It's the ultimate starter pack for a new life, a full agricultural portfolio you can fit in your pocket. This first diaspora is not the end of the Hmong. In China, millions remain behind to navigate life as a browbeaten ethnic minority within the Qing Empire, but it is the planting of a new seed, the beginning of a new chapter for the Hmong people as a transnational population scattered across the mountains of Asia. The families who make this perilous journey are the pioneers, the survivors, the ones who choose exile over assimilation. They carry with them the stories of Qiyu, the defeated warrior king, the memory of the great rebellions, the whispers of a lost kingdom, and the techniques of weaving their history into pine top. They are not just fleeing, they are carrying a cultural arc to a new land, hoping to find a place where they can rebuild their world far from the reach of the dragon throne. They do not know what the future holds, but they know they cannot go back. The journey south is an act of incredible bravery and profound loss, a leap of faith into an unknown wilderness, driven by the ghost of a destroyed homeland. The first few decades of the 1800s settle into an unquiet peace. In the Hmong heartlands of southern China, the Great Rebellion is a fresh and painful memory, and the Qing military presence remains overwhelming. A new generation is born into a world where open resistance seems not just futile but suicidal. A mainstream historical fact of this period is the tightening of Qing administrative control. The Gaitaguelu policy of replacing native chieftains with appointed officials is now fully implemented across the region. The network of garrisons and forts is complete, and the surviving Hmong population is largely confined to designated areas, carefully watched and heavily taxed. The peace you are witnessing is the peace of a prison yard, an absence of open conflict born of exhaustion and overwhelming force, not of reconciliation or contentment. It's the kind of quiet that follows a huge argument where no one is talking but everyone is still angry. You move through a Hmong village in Guizhou in the 1820s or 1830s, and the atmosphere is one of profound melancholy and resignation. The elders, who remember the war, are silent, their eyes holding a deep sorrow. The younger people, who have known nothing but Qing rule, are caught between two worlds. They are taught in Qing schools to despise their own heritage, yet they hear the old stories and songs in secret at home. They are a generation wrestling with a deep identity crisis, forced to navigate the treacherous currents between assimilation and tradition, between survival and self-respect. The vibrant culture you saw before the Great Wars now seems muted and subdued, practiced behind closed doors, almost shamefully, as if the people themselves have internalized the Qing view of their customs as backward and inferior beneath the sullen surface. However, the embers of resistance are not entirely extinguished. They have just gone deeper underground. The clan networks and secret trails are still active, but now they are used less for plotting rebellion and more for everyday survival, for smuggling untaxed goods, for helping people escape corvée labor, and for maintaining a sense of community in the face of the state's attempts to atomize them. Sporadic violence continues to flare up, not as organized rebellion, but as small localized outbursts. A hated official is assassinated, a grain transport is ambushed, a landlord's house is burned. These are acts of desperation, not of strategy, pinpricks against the hide of the Qing Leviathan, and the state's response is always disproportionately brutal. A village is punished for the actions of a few, reinforcing the cycle of resentment and retribution. Historians still debate the psychological impact of this prolonged period of oppression. Did it succeed in creating a pacified population that accepted its subordinate status, or did it merely create a culture of everyday resistance, where people learned to subtly defy and subvert the state in countless small ways, without resorting to open warfare? Was the spirit of the free people broken, or had it simply adapted, learning to fight a different kind of war, a war of attrition for cultural survival? It seems the Hmong spirit wasn't broken, but it was certainly bent into a new shape by the Relentless pressure, a quirky tidbit from this era of unquiet peace, is the rise of a new kind of folk hero in Hmong oral tradition, the clever trickster who outwits the stupid and arrogant Qing official. Unlike the epic warrior heroes of the past, this new hero doesn't win with a sword, but with his wits. He uses the official's own greed and bureaucratic foolishness against him to win a small victory for his people, perhaps tricking him out of some silver or getting a fellow villager released from prison. These stories are a form of psychological release, a way to laugh at their oppressors and reclaim a sense of agency and superiority. Even in a powerless situation, it's a callback to the gossip warfare of the earlier period, a way of fighting back with stories when other weapons are unavailable. It's the quiet satisfaction of knowing you're smarter than the guy who has his boot on your neck. This period of simmering resentment and low-level conflict is not stable. It is a pressure cooker, with the heat slowly being turned up. The Qing Dynasty itself is beginning to show signs of internal decay and external pressure. The disastrous Opium Wars with the British in the 1840s will soon shatter the myth of Qing invincibility and weaken its grip on the entire country. Corruption is rampant in the bureaucracy, and the empire's finances are strained. Local officials, often left to their own devices, become even more predatory in their extraction of resources to make up for shortfalls from the central government. For the Hmong and other groups in the southwest, this means more taxes, more land grabs, and more daily humiliations. The unquiet peace is fraying at the edges. The conditions that led to the Great Rebellion of 1795 are not only still present, they are getting worse. The lessons the Qing thought they had taught with fire and sword have not been learned. The lessons the Hmong learned about Qing brutality, however, have been etched into their collective soul. They are waiting not for a messiah this time, but for an opportunity, a moment of weakness in the great empire that holds them captive. And that moment is coming sooner than anyone expects. The fragile, unquiet peace shatters completely in the mid-19th century. The Qing Dynasty, weakened by the Opium Wars and rocked by the massive Taiping Rebellion in its heartlands, is losing its grip. The moment of weakness the Hmong have been waiting for has arrived, and they seize it with a vengeance. In 1854, the third and largest great wave of fire erupts across Guizhou, a conflict that will rage for nearly 2 decades, until 1873. This is not just a rebellion, it is a cataclysm, a war of such scale and ferocity that it will dwarf the previous uprisings and change the face of the region forever. You are now in a land aflame, where the accumulated rage of more than a century of oppression is finally unleashed in a torrent of violence. The mainstream historical fact is that this rebellion, often called the Miao Rebellion of 1854 to 73, was part of a series of massive Hui Muslim or Pantai rebellions that swept across southwestern China. At the same time, the Hmong were not fighting alone. They were a key part of a gigantic multi-ethnic uprising against a teetering dynasty. The leaders of this rebellion are different from those of the past. They are not just charismatic shamans preaching of a Hmong king. They are hardened, cynical men who have grown up in a world of violence and betrayal. Leaders like Zhang Xiaomei are pragmatic and ruthless organizers who forge alliances of convenience with Hui Muslim rebels and other anti-Qing forces. They understand that this may be their last chance to break free, and they are willing to pay any price to achieve it. The rebellion's goal is stark and simple: the complete and total extermination of Qing authority and Han presence in their territories, a callback to the goals of the 1795 uprising, but now pursued with even greater fury. The rebels sweep across the countryside, their numbers swelling into the hundreds of thousands. They capture city after city, destroying Yamen's government offices and slaughtering officials, landlords, and anyone associated with the Qing state. The war is one of almost unimaginable savagery, the Qing Dynasty already fighting for its life against the Taiping rebels cannot spare its best troops. For the southwest, the local Green Standard armies are corrupt, demoralized, and often melt away in the face of the rebel onslaught. This creates a power vacuum that is filled by local Han Chinese landowners and gentry who form their own private militias called Tuanlian to protect their property and fight the rebels. The conflict evolves into a brutal ethnic war, a cycle of massacre and counter-massacre between Hmong-led rebel forces and Han militias, there's no front line, no non-combatants, just a chaotic landscape of fortified villages and roving bands of fighters, where your ethnicity determines whether you live or die. Historians still debate the extent of coordination between the Hmong rebels and the massive Taiping Rebellion, which was raging at the same time to the east. While there is little evidence of direct command and control links the Taiping's success in tying down the bulk of the Qing military was the single most important factor enabling the Hmong rebellion to survive and thrive for so long. The Taipings were the unwitting allies of the Hmong, creating a massive strategic diversion that gave the southwestern rebels nearly 2 decades of breathing room, a space they filled with fire and blood. A quirky and grim tidbit from this chaotic period is the rebels' practice of forcing captured Qing officials or Han scholars to write their proclamations for them. You can imagine the scene: a terrified magistrate, his hands trembling, being forced at sword point to use his elegant calligraphy to write out a declaration denouncing the Qing emperor and calling for his overthrow. It's a bitter and ironic reversal of roles, where the tools of the imperial bureaucracy are turned against it. The rebels themselves, mostly illiterate, use the literacy of their enemies to legitimize their own cause, creating documents that are a strange hybrid of sophisticated literary style and brutal revolutionary content. It is a perfect metaphor for the world turned upside down, a moment when the oppressed literally put their own words into the mouths of their oppressors. For a time, it seems the rebels might actually succeed. They control vast swathes of Guizhou, and their armies besiege the provincial capital of Giang. The Qing state seems on the verge of complete collapse in the southwest, a situation far more dire than in 1735 or 1795. The Hmong and their allies have carved out a de facto independent state from the wreckage of the empire, but their success is built on a foundation of sand. The rebellion is a coalition of disparate groups with different goals, united only by their hatred of the Qing. Once the immediate enemy is pushed back, their own rivalries and tensions begin to show, and more importantly, the Qing Dynasty, though battered and bruised, is not yet dead. Once the Taiping Rebellion is finally crushed in 1864, the state can once again turn its full attention to the smoldering fires in the southwest. The deadliest and most professional Qing armies, hardened by a decade of war against the Taipings, are about to be unleashed on the Hmong. The third great wave of fire has reached its terrifying peak, but the imperial response will be a tsunami of violence that will wash it all away. The end of the Taiping Rebellion in 1864 marks the beginning of the end for the Hmong uprising. The Qing Dynasty victorious, but scarred, can now redeploy its best generals and most seasoned armies to the southwest. The final pacification is a slow, methodical, and horrifically costly affair. You witnessed the Qing war machine at its most ruthless and efficient, led by formidable provincial governors like Zheng Guofan, who had perfected the art of counterinsurgency against the Taipings. They bring with them modern Western-made cannons and rifles purchased and copied during the Taiping War, giving them an overwhelming technological advantage. A mainstream historical fact is that this period saw the Qing's self-strengthening movement, where the empire began to selectively adopt Western military technology to suppress internal rebellions. The Hmong fighters, with their swords, spears, and antique muskets, are now facing armies equipped with weapons that can kill from a far greater distance and with a terrifying rate of fire. The Qing strategy is a grim echo of the past, but executed with even greater thoroughness and brutality. It is the Qingjiao scorched earth policy you saw before, but now amplified by new technology and a generation of commanders who have become desensitized to mass slaughter. They encircle the rebel-held territories in a ring of forts and blockhouses, slowly tightening the noose. They don't seek decisive battles. They seek annihilation. They systematically destroy every village, cutting down forests to eliminate hiding places and poisoning water sources to deny them to the rebels. It is a war against the entire population and the land itself. The cost in human life is staggering, far exceeding the losses of the previous rebellions. Entire regions of Guizhou are almost completely depopulated. The once fierce rebel armies are ground down by attrition, starvation, and disease. Their numbers dwindle, their weapons run out of ammunition, and their hope evaporates in the face of the Relentless Qing advanced the final stronghold of the rebellion fall one by one in a series of bloody sieges. The Hmong fighters display incredible courage, fighting to the last man, woman, and child. But bravery is no match for artillery shells and disciplined rifle volleys. The capture of their last major base in 1873 marks the effective end of the nearly 2-decade-long war. The leader Zhang Xiaomei is captured and executed in a gruesome public spectacle designed to crush any remaining glimmer of defiance. The final pacification's horrific cost is almost impossible to comprehend. Historians still argue about the total death toll, with credible estimates ranging from 1 million to as many as 4 or 5 million people across Guizhou and neighboring provinces killed in the intertwined Hmong and Muslim rebellions and their suppression. It was a demographic catastrophe on a scale that is hard to imagine. A Holocaust in the mountains that left a scar on the region. For a century, the Hmong population of Guizhou was reduced by some estimates by as much as 70%. It was a victory for the Qing, but one achieved by turning one of their own provinces into a desolate wasteland. A quirky and macabre tidbit from this final phase is the Qing army's use of photography. For the first time in this region, Western photographers sometimes accompanied the Qing forces, documenting the aftermath of battles and the execution of rebel leaders. These stark black and white images are haunting artifacts of the conflict. They show rows of severed heads or rebels kneeling before their executioners, their faces blank with resignation. It's a shocking collision of the ancient and the modern, where the latest technology is used to record the most ancient forms of brutality, a callback to the Miao albums, but so much more immediate and visceral. The painter's brush is replaced by the photographer's lens, but the imperial gaze remains the same, cold, clinical, and triumphant, capturing the final moments of a defeated people. For the historical record, the war is over. The third and greatest rebellion has been crushed with a finality that leaves no room for doubt or hope. The Hmong dream of independence, which had flickered for over a century, has been definitively extinguished in a sea of blood. The surviving Hmong are a shattered remnant, a people who have lost everything: their leaders, their land, their population, and their will to fight. The pacification is complete. The Qing have finally and absolutely imposed their will on the people of the mountains. The cost was a genocide, but from the perspective of the imperial court in Beijing, order has been restored. The silence that now falls over the highlands of Guizhou is the profound and eternal silence of the grave, a quiet paid for with millions of lives. The last gun has fallen. Silent, the last rebel stronghold is a pile of rubble, and you now wander through a homeland that is forever and irrevocably changed. This is the Guizhou of the late 1800s. In the aftermath of the Great Pacification, and the most overwhelming sensation is one of emptiness and eerie quiet. The misty mountains that were once a fortress and a sanctuary, a callback to their role as a refuge, are now just mountains, scarred, silent, and subdued. You walk past the ruins of a Hmong village, its blackened timbers slowly being reclaimed by weeds and vines, and feel the profound absence of the people who once lived here. The land itself seems to be holding its breath, mourning the millions who are gone. The vibrant, chaotic energy of Hmong life has been replaced by the heavy stillness of a graveyard, a piece purchased at a genocidal price. A mainstream historical fact of this era is the Qing government's active promotion of Han Chinese settlement into these newly depopulated regions. The state offered incentives like tax breaks and land grants to poor and landless Han peasants from other crowded provinces, encouraging them to move into the highlands of Guizhou and Yunnan. This wasn't just an accident of history. It was a deliberate state policy, a demographic final solution designed to permanently alter the ethnic makeup of the region and ensure that the Hmong could never again form a rebellious majority in their own heartland. You see these new settlers everywhere. They are building new villages, often right on top of the ruins of the old Hmong ones. Their architecture is different: square houses of rammed earth and tile, arranged in neat rows. Unlike the scattered wooden homes of the Hmong, they bring with them a new way of life and a new way of seeing the land. They clear the forests not for slash and burn, but for permanent terraced rice paddies and cornfields. They build new market towns with shops and tea houses that cater to a Han clientele. The entire economic and social landscape is being re-engineered Before your eyes, the surviving Hmong are now a marginalized minority in their own ancestral territory. Many have lost their land and are forced to become tenant farmers or day laborers for the new Han landlords working fields that their own families had farmed for generations. They are trapped at the bottom of a new social and economic hierarchy, their poverty and powerlessness a constant reminder of their defeat. The transformation is so complete that it's almost dizzying. The Hmong are ghosts in their own home, overshadowed by the sheer number and confidence of the newcomers. The Qing military presence remains, but it is less about overt occupation now, and more about underwriting this new colonial reality. The garrisons are still there, but they primarily serve to protect the Han settlements and enforce the new property laws that favor the settlers over the indigenous population. The war is over, but the conquest continues through other means, through economics. Demographics and law historians still debate the long-term success of this Qing resettlement policy. From the state's perspective, it worked. It broke the back of Hmong resistance and integrated the region more fully into the empire than ever before. But did it create a stable and harmonious society, or did it merely lay the groundwork for a century of ethnic tension and resentment that would simmer and sometimes boil over well into the 20th century and beyond? Did it solve the Miao problem, or did it just transform it into a new and more intractable form of ethnic stratification and conflict? A quirky and particularly poignant tidbit of this transformation is the changing of names. The new Qing administrators and their Han settler allies engage in a form of cartographic warfare, systematically erasing Hmong place names from the map. Mountains, rivers, and even entire regions that had Hmong names for centuries are given new official Chinese names, names that often celebrate Qing military victories or reflect Confucian virtues. A mountain once known by a Hmong name meaning Dragon's Back might be renamed Peak of Imperial Benevolence. This linguistic cleansing is a subtle but profound act of dispossession. It is an attempt to wipe the Hmong's history off the very land they inhabit, to make their presence invisible and their claims to the territory illegitimate. It is the final touch on the project of creating a new Han dominated reality, a callback to the Miao albums. This is the same impulse to define and control, but now applied to the geography itself. You stand on a hill and look out over a valley that was once a center of rebellion. Now it is filled with the neat squares of Han farms and the smoke rising from the chimneys of a new settler village. You might see a small group of Hmong trudging along a road, their traditional clothing replaced by the drab blue cotton of the peasantry, their faces weary and resigned. They are strangers in their own land. The fortress has fallen and been occupied not just by soldiers, but by a whole new people and a new way of life. The homeland is forever changed, a place of ghosts and memories, where the very stones have been given new names by the conquerors. The century of fire is over, and what follows is the long cold era of survival in a world that is no longer their own. So, after this long journey through fire and sorrow, we find ourselves back where we started, standing in the silent, mist-filled mountains of southern China, asking the same question that we began with. A Hmong Empire. What was it? Was it real, or was it just a ghost, a story told around a dying fire? Now, after seeing the full brutal arc of history, you can understand that the question of whether the empire was a literal brick-and-mortar reality is almost irrelevant. What mattered was that the Hmong believed it was real, and that belief, that powerful collective memory, became the ideological fuel. For nearly 2 centuries of resistance, it was their answer to the Qing state's relentless campaign to define them as scattered primitive barbarians. When the magistrate asked, "Who are you?" they had an answer: "We are not just Miao, we are the descendants of a great kingdom, the heirs of a sovereign people, a nation in exile." It was the ultimate retort, the original, "We were a country." And it gave them a sense of unity and purpose that transcended clan loyalties. The ghost of this empire was given flesh and bone in the figure of their great ancestor Qi Yu. A mainstream historical fact that gave their myth incredible power is that Qi Yu, as you'll remember, is not just a Hmong folk hero. He is mentioned in ancient Chinese texts, like the records of the Grand Historian, as a real and formidable adversary of the Yellow Emperor, the legendary progenitor of the Han Chinese civilization. This meant that from the Hmong perspective, their claim to a past glory wasn't just a fantasy, it was corroborated by Their enemies' own history books, it gave them a historical anchor, a precedent for sovereignty. They weren't just rebels. They were restorationists, fighting to reclaim a birthright that had been stolen from them. Every rebellion from 1735 to 1854 was in a sense an attempt to rewind history, to call the ghost of Chiyu back from the spirit world and put a Hmong king back on a throne, a callback to the messianic prophecies that swept through the rebel camps. This wasn't just a desire for less taxes, it was a deeply felt historical and spiritual mission to right an ancient wrong. The Qing, for their part, were not oblivious to the power of this founding myth. They understood that the story of a lost kingdom was dangerous ideological poison that fueled the Hmong's stubborn refusal to submit. So they waged a propaganda war against it. A quirky tidbit of imperial policy was the active promotion of the Yellow Emperor cult in the Southwest, while simultaneously vilifying Chiyu in official proclamations and state-sponsored education. They portrayed him as a horned demon, a monstrous rebel, a quintessential villain, whose defeat was necessary for civilization to flourish. It was an ancient history smack down, a battle of the bands between founding fathers, and the Qing were determined that their guy would be the only one on the charts. They were essentially running an imperial fact-checking service, whose only approved fact was their own supremacy. Historians still argue whether the Hmong myth of a great kingdom was a continuous oral tradition handed down from an actual state, or if it was what they call a charter myth, a story that was embellished or even largely created later on to justify a present political need. In other words, did the memory of the kingdom inspire the resistance, or did the need for resistance inspire the creation of the memory of a kingdom? It's a fascinating chicken and egg problem that gets to the heart of how communities, under pressure, construct their own histories to survive. In the end, the ghost of the empire was both a blessing and a curse. It gave the Hmong the spiritual and psychological strength to endure unimaginable hardship and to fight for their freedom against impossible odds. It united disparate clans into powerful coalitions and gave their sacrifices a meaning beyond simple survival, but it also locked them into a cycle of unwinnable conflicts. It was a siren song that lured them onto the rocks of Qing military power again and again, each time with more devastating consequences. The dream of a restored kingdom was so powerful, so seductive, that it led them to reject any possibility of compromise, pushing them toward total war and total defeat. Standing here now in the ruins of the Hmong heartland, you can see the tragic irony laid bare. The very story that gave them the will to fight is what led to their near-total destruction. The ghost of their fabled empire haunted them and drove them and ultimately led them to this graveyard. The dream was powerful enough to sustain a war for 150 years, but it wasn't powerful enough to win it. And now that ghost has been seemingly exorcised from the land of its birth by blood and fire. But a story that powerful doesn't just die, it travels. And so the story travels not on the wind this time, but in the hearts and minds of the survivors, the ones who made that desperate journey south out of China a century ago, and their children, and their children's children. A new chapter begins not in China, but in the misty highlands of Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam. Here, they rebuild their world, a world that is a mirror of the one they lost. They live in small villages high on the mountainsides. They practice their slash-and-burn agriculture. They raise their pigs and chickens, and they keep the spirits of the land happy. They are once again the people of the mist, living on the margins of yet another state. But for a time, they are relatively free. Then, in the mid-20th century, history comes for them again in the form of the Cold War and the conflict in Vietnam. A mainstream historical fact that defines the modern Hmong experience is their recruitment by the CIA to fight in this secret war. In Laos, the mountainous terrain they master so well and their fierce fighting spirit make them ideal guerrilla allies for the United States against the communist Pathet Lao and their North Vietnamese backers. You are there in the rugged hills of Laos as American operatives in civilian clothes with short haircuts and government money make contact with a Hmong general named Vang Pao. They promise weapons training and support in exchange for the Hmong fighting on their behalf. It's a tempting offer for a people who have always valued their autonomy and feared domination by the lowland governments. The recruitment pitch is probably less, "We want you," and more, "Hey, you're really good at this guerrilla warfare thing, and we have a problem." And so for 15 years the Hmong fight and die in a war that is not officially happening, a secret known to all who live there, but denied in the halls of power in Washington. It is a brutal conflict that turns their new homeland into another landscape of ash and sorrow, a callback to the devastation you saw in Guizhou when the United States withdraws from Southeast Asia in the 1970s, and the communist forces are victorious. The Hmong are abandoned. They are now seen as traitors by the new government of Laos, and a brutal campaign of retribution begins. It is the Qing suppression all over again, a new genocide for a new generation, faced with persecution and death. Tens of thousands are forced to flee once more, undertaking a perilous journey across the Mekong River to refugee camps. In Thailand, this second great scattering, however, does not just lead them to the next mountain range. It propels them across the globe to the United States, France, Australia, and other Western nations. The Hmong diaspora becomes truly global, but something incredible happens in this chaos and upheaval. A quirky and world-changing tidbit emerges. In the 1950s, a team of missionaries and Hmong intellectuals develop a practical and easy-to-learn writing system for the Hmong language using the Roman alphabet, the Romanized Popular Alphabet, or RPA. Remember the story of the Hmong eating their own books, losing their script to famine, and being forced to record their history in textiles. Now, for the first time in centuries, they have a written language. Once more, suddenly, their epic poems, their histories, their shamanic chants can be written down, preserved, and shared in a way that was never before possible. It is a cultural rebirth, a miracle born of the 20th century. The other thread of survival is one you can touch the pie. Top historians and anthropologists still debate the origins of a new form of this textile art that emerges from the refugee camps, the story cloth. Instead of the traditional abstract geometric patterns, Hmong women begin to stitch literal narrative scenes onto the cloth. They depict their old life in the villages of Laos, the horrors of the war with helicopters and soldiers, the desperate escape across the Mekong River, and the strange new life in the refugee camps. And America, the flower cloth, becomes a literal newspaper, a textile documentary, a way of telling their story to a world that doesn't speak their language. The intricate patterns that once looked like a QR code for a very complicated story now become a full-blown animated feature you can hang on your wall. And so you find yourself not in a mountain village, but in a bustling Hmong market in Minneapolis, or a family gathering in Fresno, California, where your own family reunions now look like a UN summit. The air is filled with the sounds of the Hmong language, now written and read as well as spoken. You see women in traditional dress of a brilliance that would have been banned by the Qing, and you see young people who are doctors, lawyers, and artists, fully a part of a new world, yet still connected to the old one, the ghost of the empire that haunted the mountains of Guizhou. You realize it was never about a piece of land or a single king. It was the unbreakable spirit of a people who call themselves free. That spirit survived the Qing emperors, the secret wars, and the long journey across the sea. It is a spirit that refused to be eradicated, and that is the final shocking truth of this story. Not that the Hmong Empire existed in the past, but that in the courage and resilience of its scattered people it still exists today. And so our long journey through the mountains of time comes to a gentle end. The story of the Hmong, a story of kingdoms lost and found, of terrible sorrow, and of a spirit that refused to be broken, is a story of incredible strength. It is a testament to the power of a people to carry their world with them and their stories, their songs, and the intricate threads of their memory. A story that now finds its peace, not in a single lost kingdom, but in the millions of lives that carry it forward across the globe. Let the images of the past now begin to soften. Let the mist-covered peaks of Guizhou, the flash of cannon, fire, the yellow banners of rebellion, and the vibrant colors of the flower cloth all begin to recede into the quiet library of your mind. Your own journey is done for the night. There are no more mountains to climb, no more battles to witness, and no more empires to chase through the fog. Just the soft hum of the fan, the comfortable weight of your blanket, the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. The struggles of the past are faded, and the silence that remains is one of deep and profound peace. The story is over, and you can rest. Now let the echo of this history become a soft and distant drumbeat, lullaby guiding you toward a deep and peaceful sleep, letting go of the day as you drift deeper and deeper into the quiet comfort of the night.